26. Exodus 26. Okay. We've been studying about the tabernacle for 5 weeks. Week 5. Woohoo! I thought it would take like 2, and we're on week 5. Okay. Tonight we're going to cover the curtains, the tent, and the veil. Curtains, tent, and veil. We've talked about the Ark of the Covenant. We've talked about the table of showbread, the lampstand, and now we are on to the actual curtains that they made. So in Exodus 26, we're going to read verse 1 to start us off. I'm not going to read everything in Exodus 26 because it is a lot of loops and hooks and boards and just a lot. So it's not a really fun read, but that's just what we're gonna hit the highlight verses. Okay, 26. Moreover, you shall make a tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine woven linen and blue, purple, and scarlet thread with artistic designs of cherubim. You shall weave them. Right? 10 curtains of fine twined linen is what we see there. If you read further on, dried blue, purple, scarlet thread embroidered the cherubims. If you read further down, it'll tell you that it's 28 cubits, which we learned a couple weeks ago was 18 inches apiece, by 4 cubits wide, which comes out to be 42 feet by 6 feet, right? So, I mean, that's a big piece of material. That's for one curtain. You have 10, right? Yes. The curtains were coupled together in sets of 5. So you have 2 sets whenever it comes to these fine linen curtains. Sets of 5, and they were fastened together with 50 loops with blue yarn on the edge to loop them together, and 50 golden rings that brought it together. This would be the innermost walls of the most holy place and the holy place. The most holy is what we call Holy of Holies, right? And then the holy place is where the table of showbread was and the lampstand. Only the priests would have saw the insides of these walls, because remember, the only ones that could go in were the priests. So only the priests would have saw the insides of these walls. So now we get to think about this for a minute, right? We have the fine linen, which almost looks like silk. As fine as they get it, it almost comes off looking like a silk. And then embroidered in there with the red, blue, and the scarlet, you have the cherubims, right? So that's going to be really pretty, because the only light in the place is the lampstand. So it's all lit by candlelight inside the place. So it's going to be really pretty. I assume it would be a sight to see once it was all together, right? Okay. In chapter 36 of Exodus, 26 is where God downloaded to Moses all the instructions for the tabernacle. And 36, 8 and 10, we see something different than what we've seen the last couple of weeks. 8 and 10, it says, and the able and the wise-hearted men, let me read it out of the right version, hold on. Then all the gifted artisans among them who worked on the tabernacle made the 10 curtains woven with linen, blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and the artistic designs of the cherubim, they made them. The length of each curtain was 28 cubits with the width of each curtain 4 cubits, and the curtains were the same size. And he coupled the 5 curtains to one another, and the 5 curtains coupled the other. This is why I was reading the other version now, is because the other version says Bezalel did that. Now we've seen Bezalel, he made the Ark of the Covenant, he made the table of showbread, he made the lampstand. Bezalel did. He's one of the only people who the Bible says in the Old Testament was actually filled with the Holy Spirit. God filled him with the Holy Spirit to do these things, to build these artifacts, right? So we actually see other people weaving the curtains, doing the embroidery for the curtains, but whenever it comes to putting them together, all of a sudden we see Bezalel again. And he's like, no, I'm going to put the curtains together, right? So I just thought that's not something that we've seen so far, because so far it's been Bezalel putting together the things. And so I thought that was interesting. Back to chapter 26. Here we go again. Okay. The fine linen we see in Revelations. Remember, the tabernacle is a representation of the Garden of Eden, but it's also a representation of the temple, Solomon's temple, and it's a representation of the final temple where God's judgment seat would lie. So you go all the way from Genesis to Revelations. In Revelations, we see fine linen painted in Revelations 19:8 as the righteous acts of the saints whenever they clothed in there, in Revelations, in the fine linen. I thought that was pretty cool. If we remember, the Ark of the Covenant have cherubim on it, which represented the glory of God, right? And his throne. Now we start to get interesting, right? Because we're starting to see some things that we haven't seen the last couple of weeks. The blue thread, right? The blue thread is represents God's throne. Blue is derived from a shellfish out of the Mediterranean Sea. They would crush it and make the blue dust, and then they would dye the thread into the blue color. It would take multiple acts of dyeing. You dye and dye and dye until you get to the color you wanted, right? So it took a lot of shellfish to do that. We see the purple thread as a representation of kingship and royalty. It was prestigious. You see a lot of, if you watch movies in the whatever medieval times or whatever, you would see a lot of those purple garments reserved for royalty. We see in Mark, I believe it's Mark 15:17 through 20, we see that Jesus is clothed in a purple robe before he is taken to be crucified. So again, another level of kingship. You don't see purple a lot in nature, so it was hard to make things purple. They couldn't just find that pigment anywhere. It's expensive. It was exclusive. It was made from a sea snail gland. Did you have a question? Yeah, for the priests. I can bring you. Okay. Yeah, that's blue thread, and I can bring you a prayer shawl if you wanted to see one. I can to see the blue thread. Darren has one. It was given to him whenever he was ordained. Anyway, so the snail gland. So this is one small snail would produce one drop of purple dye to be able to dye the snail. Yeah. So it took, to make 1 pound of dye, it took over 1 million snails. Isn't that crazy? You wonder where they get all these dyes and stuff. And I mean, they're having to harvest it out of the sea just like everybody else, or out of the ground, or out of nature. And so it's just, it puts it in perspective what they're doing here in the tabernacle and the effort that it takes and the money it would take in this tabernacle, right? The scarlet thread represents blood, power, prestige. Only Hebrews could obtain this dye. The Egyptians had a red scarlet, but their red scarlet was derived from an herb, and it wasn't as bright, I guess, as the Hebrews' red dye. So scarlet, actually, whenever you dig it back to the Hebrew version, it is also synonymous with crimson. And so you would see that it's from a tallow worm that infects oak trees. And we also see that color again in Revelations 8 in the temple whenever judgment is happening. Okay, all that said, right? It's a lot. The building would have spanned 10 cubits wide, 10 cubits high, and 30 cubits long. So it would have been 15 feet wide on the back, 15 feet high, and 45 feet long. So I don't know how long our church is. Yeah. I don't know how wide it is either. There you go. Yeah. There you go. So, good to know, right? That's what all them cubits boil down to right there. So now if we go down to Exodus 26, 7 through 13, we're going to read verse 7, because then it breaks up into all kinds of crazy stuff again. So we'll make curtains of goat hair, and the covering over the tabernacle. 11 curtains shall you make. Okay, goat hair. Just hit that, sorry. We see in the scripture a second layer, right? So you have your fine linen, and then over top of that, we're going to see the goat hair. The goat hair is 30 cubits by 4 cubits, which means that it's longer than the linen. It's made to protect the linen. Instead of the 10 curtains, we now see 11. The extra curtain is going to be part of the door to cover and protect the linen again, and to protect the tabernacle. And the extra, I just said that. We also see 50 loops again, and we see 50 clasps again, but this time instead of the clasps being full gold, like they were for the linen, these clasps are going to be bronze. Okay, and there's a reason behind that. As we said previously, the inner layer of the linen is 10 curtains, which represents, in the Bible, whenever you see the number 10, it represents discipline and order, okay? Whenever you see the number of 11, it's usually synonymous with imperfection, disorder, and chaos. So you have your 10 curtains represents order, God's order, right? And then you have overlaying it with the goat's hair, you see the number 11, which would be chaos. Okay? The bronze in the Bible represents human nature. Put that with the chaos. How much chaos do we see in our human nature? Right? If gold represents godliness, and 10 represents order, and bronze represents human nature, and 11 represents chaos, we're starting to paint a picture. God's starting to paint a picture as he's covering the tabernacle, right? I knew you would ask. Go ahead. Go ahead. There you go. More information. Okay. We see in Numbers 21:19 that they used bronze to make a serpent idol, which again just reflects into that human nature, that chaos, disorder. We see goat hair is another representation. Goat hair, when do we see the goat whenever we're in the tabernacle? Does anybody remember? We just celebrated it. It ended Monday. Yom Kippur, right? The big Jewish holiday. We just finished that. We went from Rosh Hashanah into Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. Go ahead. They cut it off. Oh, you didn't take the skin. You took the hair and you weave the hair. That would be a lot of goat hair to weave. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So, so, no, that's in Leviticus, I think. Was that when they were dedicating the temple? Mm-hmm. Well, remember, all these riches they stole from, well, they didn't steal. It was given them from Egypt whenever they came through. Yeah. So they went from slave to rich. In the past weeks, we've even talked about what some of the gold figurines would weigh and what it would be in today's money. And we were in the millions of dollars of what it would take, because a lot of what's in the tabernacle is overlaid with gold. And we'll see that more as we dig in. The hair is removed from the goat. Some people say some theologians say that is a representation of Christ, as he chose to leave heaven and come down and become man. And that removing of the goat hair would be a representation, which you could follow that. Since the goat is used as a sacrifice, I can see how they could say that process would then be a representation of Christ, because Christ is the ultimate sacrifice. Goats, the curtains. Well, whenever you get to the wood, you'll be like, these aren't normal studs that we talk about. Because no, I don't know. I don't know that. Okay. So then we see a scapegoat for atonement, which Jewish people just ended on Monday. That their ceremony just ended on Monday. So we also see goat hair in, and I thought this was interesting, as a state of mourning. They would wear goat hair whenever you hear about the sackcloth and ash. If anybody's familiar with that in the Bible, the sackcloth they would wear is actual goat hair. Yes. So I thought that was interesting too. So he's really starting to paint the picture. You start off with gold, pure gold, and the godly nature, and then the bronze, and then the discipline, and then the chaos, and then the fine linen, where we're seeing the royalty and the blood and heaven, to the goat's hair, right? He's starting to paint a picture between each layer, right? So now we're on to the third layer. There's 4 layers all together. And so we're going to go to Exodus 26:14. And this cracks me up, because he took 7 verses to describe the first layer and 7 or 8 verses to describe the second layer. And then we get to the third layer in Exodus 26:14. And he says, "You shall also make a covering of ram skin dyed red for the tent, and then a covering of badger skin above that." Oh, we're going to talk about it. So he takes all this time, laying out the first 2 layers, and then in one verse, he says, oh yeah, throw on the other 2 layers, right? So I thought that was interesting, because he was so specific about the first couple, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about the ram skin. We're on the 3rd layer. Ram skin dyed red. They're going to use that same technique that they dyed the scarlet yarn, right? They're going to use that same technique to dye the ram skin. So there's going to be a lot of harvesting of that little gland for that little snail, or the worm, crushing of the worm. That's what we're doing, the crushing of the worm. There's going to be a lot of worm crushing to dye the ram skin, right? When do we first see a ram listed in the Bible? Do we know? Abraham. Abraham and Isaac. He's taken Isaac up the hill, right? And he's going to sacrifice his one and only son. Well, his only son that was gifted to him by God. And what does he see in the thicket? The ram. So it was again used as a sacrifice in place of the son at that time, right? So then we see ram skin. That's really all you can find about ram skin, I think. It's listed throughout on some other things, but yeah, the sacrifice is what I was trying to get to. Okay, then we see the badger skin. So if you take it back to Hebrew, it says badger or porpoise or dolphin or manatee, okay? But I want you to reflect back on where we are. We're in the Middle East. We're at Mount Sinai. They did cross the Red Sea, but I don't think porpoises live in the Red Sea, right? So this is what I allude to. It's probably going to be the badger. I started looking up the badger. There is a badger that lives in the mountains in the Middle East, right? And this little badger, they call him the wisest animal in that region because they're small, they blend into the rocks, they hide out in the rocks. Anytime anything spooks them or scares them, they hide underneath the rocks. They're hard to find. They also will have multiple lookouts. Like if you go out looking for them and you see them in their natural environment, they would have lookouts up on the rocks, and they would make a noise anytime they saw something suspicious, and then all the badgers would go and hide. So I can only imagine that to get enough badger skin to cover the tabernacle, I would say it was probably a significant amount of terrible hunting to get all of that up there, right? By the time you dried it and you treated it and you skinned it and all that stuff, it would come out looking like leather. And we do see badger skin throughout the word. Almost every book, I would think, is they used it for sandals. They used it to waterproof. So you'd think it would almost be like a roof to us today, shingles or whatever. They would use it to make their water bags to drink out of. So lots of uses for the badger skin. Does that answer your question about the badgers? Sister Vicky. It kind of looked like a groundhog to me. They just said it looked like leather. So I would assume it would have came off as like a brown color because it would have also camouflaged the tabernacle from their enemies. So I would think it would come off as a tan or a brown color. They didn't dye it any specific color. Right. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move on, right? So now we're into Exodus 26:15. We covered our last two layers. But what in this structure is actually holding this up? That's a lot of weight. Like Darren said, it's a lot of weight on there. So then we go into Exodus 26:15. And we see, in the tabernacle, you shall make the boards of acacia wood standing upright. And we learned previously in the lessons that acacia wood is a very hard wood. It would never even get infested with like termites or bugs or anything like that because the wood was so hard. And they made a lot of furniture out of it. They made a lot of, trying to think what I actually have acacia wood spoons to cook with. Yeah, I should have brought you one. You could see what acacia wood looks like. ACACIA. It probably says Schmitten. Schmitten wood and acacia wood are the same thing. If you break them both down to Hebrew, they come out the same thing. Okay, so you're going to start building the wood, right? It's going to be 10 cubits high and 1.5 cubits wide. So we're talking about your board is going to be 15 feet long, and it's going to be 2.25 feet wide. That's a pretty big stud. Like, I was thinking, like, how would they construct this? But that is, I mean, that's a pole. You would take multiple men to lift that, I would think. Well, and because it's a very dense wood. And you have to remember that they're picking up and moving this everywhere they move the camp. They're picking up and moving this tabernacle with them, right? So, I mean, that's some very big wood. Each board would have 2 tenons, is what the word says. And the tenon is dovetailing. And some of you guys could probably tell more about what dovetailing is than I could. I just looked it up, and it was like notching, I guess, to fit the wood together. Yeah, I guess. Dovetailing. So it interlocked and fitted securely together. But now I've looked at like old barns and stuff. Have you guys seen this? Where like they have to number the boards because there's a certain order whenever you dovetail that they would have to go in that they would fit correctly. Am I right, wrong? Well, they would have to because they're moving it. It does come from the desert.
And because they don't get a lot of rain, they're really dense, and that's what happens here. If you look at the rings of a tree, you see small rings, and you see larger ones. The larger ones is when you got a lot of rain. The tighter ones, which makes it more dense, is when they don't have a lot of rain. So we know they didn't have a lot of rain over there, so that's why the wood is so dense.
Well, then I could imagine that it would take years and years and years to even get a tree big enough to make a board that big. Okay. I'm sure he did. For this and for the ark, right? Mm-hmm. It takes a while. So, okay, there were 20 boards fastened with 40 silver sockets on the south side, just on the south side. There were 20 boards on the north side, and there's 20 boards on the west side. As you know, the east side held the gate, and so there's going to be a different makeup for the east side, right? He lays out specific instructions for that. And each board, if it wasn't heavy enough by itself, is then overlaid with gold again. Yeah. Lots of gold. All right, and Exodus 26, 31 through 35, we're going to look at the veil. And this is probably the most predominant, one of the most predominant things in the tabernacle that we as Christians know about, because the veil was rent, so now we get to go in the Holy of Holies, right? So we've all been taught that all of our life, which is accurate. 31 through 35.
Yeah, that's like acacia wood grows about 3 feet a year, but they can last 20 to 30 years. Yeah.
Probably high, but you would need it wide enough to be 2.25.
They said they're really known for their long roots that stabilize
The tree.
stabilize the ground where it might become eroded.
Mm,
So,
good to know.
there you go.
Good to know.
Looking for
Probably. Okay, so you shall make a veil woven with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, which we saw previously, didn't we? And with the artistic design of the cherubim, which we saw previously, right? And you shall hang it up by 4 pillars of acacia wood, and overlay it with gold, and their hooks shall be gold, and upon them their sockets of silver. So it's going to take 4 pillars to hold up the veil. 4 pillars. And the veil from clasps, and then you shall bring the ark of testimony in there and put it behind the veil, and the veil should be a divider between the holy place and the most holy place. Most holy being what we call the Holy of Holies. The holy place is where the table of showbread is with the sacrament and the lampstand, right? Holy place. And you shall put the mercy seat upon the ark and the testimony of the most holy. That's just talking about where to put the table and all that stuff, right? Which we already knew. So the veil we see again with the threads made the same way, embroidered the same way. The pillars are overlaid with gold, the hooks gold, and then the silver sockets. It's the separation of man could not enter, but only the high priest on the Day of Atonement. Those that still follow that Jewish tradition, the high priest on Monday would have been the only one who was still allowed into the Holy of Holies. So, as we know, in Matthew 27, in most of the Gospels, just specifically in Matthew 27:51, when Jesus died on the cross, the veil was torn. Why was the veil torn? Opened it up for us. The ultimate sacrifice was made. We now have free access to God, right? It was ripped from top to bottom. Yeah. That was not made from goats. Did you not listen tonight? Okay, so then if you think about, us in the garden, right? Adam and Eve walked in the cool of the night with God and communed with God, walking together, talking, right? Sin happened. We get booted out. We're not having to talk through a veil, through the priest into the veils, right? And only the high priest can go in and actually go into what represented the throne of God. To now the veil is torn and we get free access again. And God's just trying to make that process so that we can reconnect and commune with him. That's what he wants. He wants to be able to talk to us in the cool of the evening like he did with Adam and Eve. And if that's whenever you wake up at 5:30 in the morning, or if you talk to him before you go to bed at 10:30 at night, he just wants that communication back with man. He wants us to want him. Last but not least, and we're going to make it through this chapter. I didn't think we were going to make it tonight, guys, but we did. Last but not least, they put a screen on the door. Again, woven of the fine linen with blue, purple, and scarlet thread. Those poor little worms. We're going to see the wood again overlaid with gold, and this time we're going to see 5 pillars. And they're going to be acacia wood, and they shall be fastened together, this time with sockets of bronze. And it's going to be a screen for the what would be for the door, in one full piece. And that is the curtains, tent, and